Rematch, a 5v5 arcade soccer game being developed by Slowclap, the creators of Absolver and Sifu. Now, anyone who has played those games knows how fluid and fun the gameplay and action is for those titles, and it seems a lot of what brought those games to life will be used in Rematch. Now, since being introduced to Rematch about a month ago, I've been eagerly waiting for the beta dates to be announced. Something about what has been shown just feels right, and I'm anticipating some real good, fast-paced competitive action. Recently, there was an interview with the developers that answered some questions about what inspired Rematch, what game structure will be like, and how it will compare to traditional soccer. If you want to check it out, I've linked the interview in the description below, but what I'll go over are the things that spoke to me the most and what I feel are key points to gaining some perspective on what it'll feel like to play the game. First question was, with Sifu and Absolver being combat focused, what inspired you to switch to soccer? They responded, there are similarities. These are all games about bodies in movement, with a focus on precise and reactive control of the character. It's not so much we wanted to move away from combat, but rather we were driven by a creative desire to explore the beauty of football. They go on to say that this will hopefully create an immersive and exciting experience for players. Now, coming from a fighting game perspective, one of the things I look for in them is how it feels to attack and to move. It's ultimately what dictates if I play a character and sometimes the game as a whole. This is exciting to hear after getting games like Sifu and Absolver to get this kind of interaction in a fast-paced, competitive, arcade sports game is just beautiful. I don't think this has been done since NBA and NFL Street to my knowledge. Let me know if I'm wrong in the comments. The next question was, what have you seen in other soccer games that you felt was missing? Most soccer games focus on a 1v1 experience, while we wanted to focus on team-based mechanics and tactical cooperation within a team. Also, other football games are viewed top-down. They lack a real sense of immersion on the pitch. Finally, by keeping the game accessible and giving it an arcade feel, we want to deliver an experience that's fun and satisfying above all. This is something that I noticed when watching the trailer. I really got that feeling of being on the field, being in the action. When gaming, I'm always searching for a way to feel more immersed in what I'm playing. Even with competitive games, this includes things like using an arcade stick for my fighting games, playing on mouse and keyboard for my FPS titles. I'm even considering getting an ultra-wide monitor for my setup. Next up, they ask, did you take any inspiration from indoor soccer leagues? Yes and no. While Rematch's 5v5 format brings indoor soccer to mind, the field size is actually closer to that of a traditional soccer game. Our primary inspiration remains association football. I feel this will be good for the sake of multiple interactions between teams as they tug of war between the goals. A lot can happen with a field that large and can keep people constantly engaged, whether they're playing the game or watching the game on Twitch, YouTube, or Kick. Next question was, many drew comparisons between Rematch's approach to soccer and Rocket League. How do you feel about these comparisons? They responded, it's hard to pinpoint a specific source of inspiration. When making a game in 2025, you're standing on the shoulders of giants. There are similarities, like the fact that the game takes place in a cage, but Rematch is very different in its mechanics and tactical gameplay. Now see, I like this take. They are implementing methods and ideas from their peers that help push the game in a good direction. I'd argue they are also taking in what not to do as well. Not that everything will be laid out for them, but when paying attention to games as big as Rocket League, they can avoid any unnecessary obstacles and issues, and they still plan on maintaining their own uniqueness. I'm curious as to what other Rocket League features will make it into Rematch though. Next up was, if one player controls the goalie, how do you ensure they are as engaged as the other players? The goalkeeper has unique mechanics that make the position really fun. When the goalkeeper leaves the penalty area, they become the sweeper and get specific stamina related bonuses. This allows goalkeepers to push forward when their team is on the offense and essentially takes on a midfield role, participating in team tactics, intercepting balls, and still being able to return to the penalty area if needed. I feel most people who don't know soccer, myself included, see the goalie position as a boring role to play. in comparison to say being a striker, but I understand its importance, so this is promising to me and will most likely get me to want to be better at that role. Moving on, the next question was, how are positions assigned within Rematch? There are no fixed positions. Players rotate dynamically based on the evolving situation. For example, another player can take over as a goalkeeper by entering the penalty area, while the original goalkeeper plays outfield as a sweeper. Now, for those who haven't seen season 1 of Blue Lock or read the manga, spoiler alert, but this reminds me of where the teams had to create soccer from zero. Most people are going to want to be the striker, getting the goal, being the star, but there are going to be situations where defense is necessary and crucial, and everyone just can't be a top scorer. It also reminds me of the approach that NetEase took with role locking in Marvel Rivals. Ultimately, they let the players decide amongst themselves who's going to play defense or support. From there, new tactics were born from a concept that at first people thought would not be good for the game. Now we have teams of 3 healers, tanks, 4 DPS, and I feel we're only beginning to scratch the surface when it comes to Marvel Rivals, so I like this approach with Rematch and can't wait to see how the game evolves dynamically over time. Okay, the last question I want to talk about is, Rematch looks to mix realism and extraordinary elements. Will there be any way to modify the experience to make it more or less realistic? They responded, it's important to note there are no fantasy elements in Rematch. We are aiming for an experience that feels both credible and epic. They go on to say, we are not trying to create a real football simulation. Instead, our choices are driven by the game's feel and depth of mechanics. One of the core pillars of development was to make players feel like amazing athletes. What more can I say? This just sounds fantastic. This brings up an issue I have with most arcade shooters nowadays. They implement too many realistic elements to their games, like sway and muzzle flash. They penalize you for moving and strafing while ADSing, and it just slows down the gameplay and makes combat boring and just more like a military simulator. Then there are some who make games that feel like they should have been played on the PlayStation 2. I mean, movement is fast, shooting feels decent, but visually the game looks cheap and it lacks any kind of depth. I feel there should be a balance with these implementations and a clear idea and understanding of where the line should be drawn when adding realistic elements and keeping the arcade-like atmosphere at the same time. Most arcade FPS titles lately I feel are just out of touch and don't grasp this concept well at all. While Rematch is not an FPS title, hearing something like this shows they have a clear vision on what they are developing and are going to strike a balance between realistic and arcade-like features. That gives me hope for other developers making arcade anything to take this approach and really pay attention to what's going on with what they're developing. So guys, that's gonna be it for me. This is probably already a longer video than I intended it to be, but as you can see, I'm very excited for this game. I really don't play sports games, but this just catches me visually. Reading through the interview, plus all the little bits of gameplay and mechanics being shown so far as we get closer to the release date, has me counting the days down. So I'll catch you guys later in the next one and see you on the pitch.